And now, it's The Law Show on CL 650. A comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law.
Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, so cross your heart? Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, so cross your heart?
And welcome to The Law Show on CL 650. I'm Zach Spencer, and today we're talking about immigration, citizenship, and we have Rudy Kisher from MKS and Gordon Maynard. Now, Gordon, welcome back. It's been a few shows. We haven't seen you. It's nice to have you back in studio.
Nice to be back. Thank you.
And Alex is taking a pass today, but that's okay. We have two of the three partners here. It's nice to have you. And we're talking about a lot of different subjects. Now, since Donald Trump has been elected, it seems to be like everything. He kind of sucks the oxygen out of the room. He takes a lot of our conversation, and we're going to kind of pick up on that a little bit. And it's a Canadian angle as well. Now, with Donald Trump putting up all kinds of bans, he wants to stop people coming into the country. He's talked about throwing people out of the country. It's affecting our border because we're having more people that are affected in the United States looking for a place to go, and they're looking to come north of the border. Manitoba and Quebec seem to be two areas where people are crossing quite a bit. So how many people do you know have come across the border, or what's the percentage of uptick that we've seen since this has all happened?
They've reported 1,000 people in the last 3 months have been arrested at the border crossings for that are most claiming refugee status. So we've had 1,000 in the last 3 months, whereas the entire of last year they reported approximately just over 1,000.
Okay,
so that's almost a 3 or 4 times increase, and that's during the winter months.
Yes,
right. So the hardest time to cross right now.
We saw those poor guys lose all their fingers.
One
right?
guy lost his fingers. Yeah. Horrible story.
Yeah. So from the way I understand it, Gordon, these are people who have come to the United States, and they're there, and they've asked for refugee status, and a lot of them have been denied, and they're waiting to be sent wherever, and they decide, okay, well, we're not getting into the U.S., let's head north to Canada. Is that basically what I'm hearing?
Well, that be some of the people that are coming across. Not everybody has the same story to tell. Not all of them are refugee claimants. Some of them have valid status in the States.
So why would they want to come to Canada?
They suspect that valid status is going to be taken away.
Oh, I see.
And, they might be visa holders. They might be work permit holders, this sort of thing. The countries that, looking at the numbers that are coming across at Emerson in Manitoba, dominantly you're looking at Somalia, Eritrea, Djibouti, South American countries, Nicaragua, Colombia. Those are people that are either making refugee claims that they just don't trust they're going to be successful in the States, or they've been turned down and they're facing removal. Now they're trying to come into Canada.
Now, one of the areas of the countries that were banned from coming to the United States, Somalia was one. Yeah. And we talked about in the past that it's basically a country with no
government,
rule of law, really. It's kind of a wild west situation. So that's being targeted, and it was targeted under the Obama administration too, as a country to watch. So maybe that's why they're not being granted refugee status there.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's a question of them not being granted refugee status, but it's definitely a question of a fear that that's what's going to happen. And what Trump has announced and tried to do through his order is also to reduce the number of resettled refugees. The United States takes about 100,000 currently under the resettlement program, and he's wanting to reduce that number to 50,000, and to prevent any landings of refugees from Somalia and any of those countries, the 6 countries on that list. So you can see how somebody's sitting there going, well, the government has said right now that they're not landing Somalians. Where is this going to go? Especially somebody who's lived in, has left already Somalia out of fear, living there going, well, I think this is going to happen here. And, as we were talking before, Trudeau made a great statement in terms of saying, Canada still welcomes refugees. And that statement is sort of, left the feeling out there, I think, for a lot of people in fear in the United States that Canada might be an option for them. I think.
Well, I took the argument in our last discussion that it sounded great. It was a good media play on the part of Trudeau, which he seems to be very good at, but. It has repercussions. Months later, this is still reverberating, and it's reverberating with people who maybe don't know the nuances. You're too close to it. This is what you do. Where you're saying refugees, and these people are like, well, Canada's accepting people. Let's head north. So we've seen the numbers go up. Like you said, 1,000 in 3 months versus 1,000 for all of last year. So we're heading into the spring. The rhetoric might heat up a little more in the United States when you have the leader of a Western country saying, come one, come all. The way they hear it.
Yeah. To be fair to him, that's not exactly what he said.
That's
right?
not what he said,
Yeah.
but that's what I'm saying is that's the way they might hear it.
Well, regardless of what he said, the reality is that people are going to be coming across our border from the United States in greater numbers because of a feel of insecurity in the States. And for those that are coming here to seek refugee protection, we are going to have to deal with those numbers one way or the other. They become our problem.
Yes, that's the issue.
And
you have to look after them. You have to...
Exactly.
Well, first of all, let's explain the difference between somebody that comes to a border crossing and seeks refugee status versus some of these people who have been denied refugee status in the States and come to our border. What would happen to that person then?
So since 2004, we've had the Safe Third Country Agreement with the United States, which the basis of that is a similar sort of agreement they had in Europe that failed miserably, which was the Irish Accord, that when you come to a country that has a similar refugee process like the United States does, that the obligation...
And they're heavily integrated too, right?
Well, I mean, we share a lot of information with each other, but we have a very similar, it's the same convention. The rules are applied a little bit differently, but, the UN sees the United States system for convention refugees as working well, right? As a functioning system. The expectation is that person should make and lodge their claim in the United States. And if they're coming from the United States, then with some exceptions, so if somebody shows up at the border, for example, and they are a minor, they will be let in. If they have family members in Canada, then they will be let in. But those are the two sort of major exemptions that allow somebody to actually come to Canada through the United States and make a claim at the port of entry and be allowed in. So if they are not one of those exemptions and they attempt to make a claim, they will be returned as not being able to make that claim and returned right there at that port of entry to the United States. And the United States has agreed to accept them, and that's the way the border generally works. If someone is not accepted into Canada when they show up, they're returned directly right then.
But a lot of these people know this, and they've been told, don't go to a border crossing. Just cross the border, and then you'll be met by somebody eventually, typically an RCMP member, and then what happens to them?
Then they will be detained, right? And there is a process that they go through. Are they eligible to make are they eligible to make a refugee claim? And they will take a look at certain things in terms of, will they continue detention? So the RCMP will turn them over generally to CBSA, to the Canadian Border Services Agency, right? CBSA will then conduct an interview with them, decide if they are making a refugee claim. If they are making a refugee claim, are they eligible to make a refugee claim? So have they claimed, there are certain exclusions, right? If they're a member, for example, of a terrorist group, you're excluded from making a refugee claim. Another example, if you've made a refugee claim in Canada in the past, you're excluded from making a refugee claim.
So let's go
Bottom
back
line, you get to make your refugee claim.
Yeah.
The third country rule does not apply if you don't come through a port of entry.
Yes, and so let's just say the largest group, as you mentioned, there's quite a few Somali people are coming through. So would their refugee claim just be the fact that they're from a country that's fallen apart?
No,
and they don't want to go back to it.
No, that's not enough. You have to have a well-founded fear that you're being persecuted, right? Right. So, and you have to be persecuted for one of the five grounds put through in the convention, such as religion, race, being a member of a recognizable group, right? And so
if you're gay, would that qualify?
That qualifies as if you can show, and usually that persecution has to be personalized, right? So the person, it's not enough to say that I'm gay and I live in Somalia and gays have a hard time. You usually have to tell a story of why you feel you're threatened. So my experience in those, a gay person in Somalia would probably have a very strong case. And most Somali cases, the last time I think I was looking at stats, I mean, for example, Syrian claimants, over 90% of Syrian claimants are successful on making a claim.
Because they're coming from a war-torn country.
A war-torn country
You can't just say war-torn country. Yeah. You don't get to make a refugee claim successfully because of civil war in your country or because it's a war-torn country. You have to show that you are a victim of persecution first and foremost.
Right. Okay.
And you have to show you don't have protection. Simply being from a war-torn country or from a country engaged in civil war is not sufficient.
So a lot of these people that come to the country and they get granted, like you said, they get the refugee claim, right?
They're allowed to proceed.
They're allowed to make the claim.
Right.
What happens to them? Are they put in? Are they allowed to sort of get an apartment, or are they detained in a holding area? Like what happens to these people?
They are initially allowed to be detained for 48 hours, and then if they decide they're going to detain them, so the officer can decide CBSA can decide to detain them or not, right? So there are really only 3 grounds for detention generally. There's a 4th ground we can talk about. But the initial ground is public safety. So is this person a danger to the public?
Sure.
Right? Do we know who this person is? Right? So if they have no identity documents, and even if we have identity documents, do we have an understanding of where they're from? Do we believe that's where they're from? If they're from sort of a country where there are issues or they sort of fit a profile, they may be detained longer to actually determine.
Or just are you say who you say you are?
Yeah.
You know,
so
if you're not that person, we're not satisfied as to identity.
Yeah. So there's identity, there's danger to the public, and the third one: are you going to show up for continued immigration process? So are you going to show up for the next hearing? Right. So if any of those 3 grounds exist, the officer can decide to detain you, and then that person would have a right to what's called a detention hearing in 48 hours, and then 7 days after that again, and then 30 days after that.
So somebody that isn't detained for those reasons, they just integrate into the society and
well, they make their refugee claim, and then they will be allowed to, they can get a work permit, right? And they'll be allowed into society, and they'll be referred on to usually groups such as Mosaic, et cetera, groups that help with refugees.
So here we are into the spring now, and the Manitoba prairie is thawing out, and do you think we're going to have more people heading north?
Yeah, you're going to have more people heading north, of course.
Yeah.
And
can the border people handle the load?
Probably not.
Because there was a CBC article just recently that I read that said, talking about Trudeau's tweets about welcoming refugees. They're saying and he's done it a couple times, is that maybe we should hold off on that because
the people aren't coming here because of Trudeau's quote. I mean,
no.
They people understand where they are. They're in the States. You got only so many choices to go to try and make that you're saying,
claim. And they're not going to go to Mexico.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you're going to come to Canada, and this doesn't come as a big surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And
so you don't think it's that? You think it's just because of based on geography?
Yeah, geography is a huge factor.
Yeah.
Now you should also be aware that there is a mechanism to deal with certain individuals or groups of individuals who come through the border in a manner that places a burden on the authorities. Canada has the legislation to designate certain arrivals, designated foreign nationals. If you come in a group of 3 or more, in circumstances where the minister says this is impeding our ability to effectively examine you and determine identity, etc., they can designate you, and the consequences are severe. The consequences are mandatory detention, long-term detention with little review.
So this is so you're thinking about people who are organizing these people and bringing them across.
That is one factor. The other factor is simply if you come in a group in numbers that are unmanageable and you're not coming through a port of entry, they can designate you. Okay.
So the minister has that power now.
Yeah,
he could be using it.
But it's sort of the nuclear weapon in dealing with it, because the consequences are very severe. Not only are you kept in detention, families are separated, of course. Even if you're successful in your claim, you're denied permanent resident status for 5 years or any ability to sponsor your family.
So it's really punitive.
Very punitive, and it's intended to deter people from coming in organized improper entries. Think of the boat people that came.
Yes.
And this was passed, this legislation came into effect after the boat people arrived, so it has never actually been used, is my understanding.
Oh, it has been used. It's been used against Roma claimants who arrive in a station wagon with a group of 6, this sort of thing. It's been used.
So it's been used a couple of times. Huh?
All right, we're going to take a quick break because we've been talking about the Trump effect, and then we have Mexico. I was on spring break, and we were in down by Tijuana, and I showed my boys. I go, there's the huge wall, because they do have a wall at Tijuana. But Mexico and how it relates to Canada next, and we're talking about immigration and citizenship with MKS Law next on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.